you don't need all the stuff to do conjugate training. Now, if you're going to do conjugate training over a period of 10 years, then yeah, they're going to have its applications. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw out a conjugate template. Anybody can do conjugate the same way anybody can do linear periodization, the same way anybody can do block periodization. You know, it's, if you're attracted to it and you're like, man, this is cool shit, then do it. Sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. Not really good with questions. Actually, she's horrible with questions, but she's a great listener. So if you guys can, you know, pop any questions up on the YouTube chat. Is that what this is? The YouTube chat. I can kind of hit those as I'm going along. I have it opened here. I'll figure out how to see them, but if not, Josh will be able to see them. And we'll just move from there. I'll give a little bit of time to let people know that we're actually here, because I think we broke a record on being late today because we had some technical difficulties. Ethel was chewing on one of the wires and caused some problems. So we'll just kind of sit and talk about nothing, I suppose. Let people come in. Yeah, I'll start straight with going into the conjugate system of training. I'll talk a little bit about, you know, my history with it, but I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that. I want to get into, I want to say the nuts and bolts, but it's not even going to be that in depth. I really, really want to keep this very simple and effective. It's the origins of what the way I'm gonna present this stems back to how I presented it the very first time. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. The way I'm gonna present this is the same way I presented it over 20 years ago. So as I do go through it, I will kind of, you know, jive away from some of the things that I do a little bit differently now than I did back then. But the reason why I presented it was I was Louie's assistant. I don't want to say, okay, I don't want to say I was his right-hand man, because that's not really true. I mean, we were more training partners than anything else. But I assisted him with all the earlier seminars, and man, I learned a lot. I actually learned more from him on the drives to and from the seminar locations that we were going to and the consultations that we were going to. And I mean, some of these were, you know, just driving to Cleveland for the Browns. Some of them were flying to Green Bay and different, you know, professional leagues, but other ones were Louie lecturing in a classroom full of exercise science students, speaking at, I believe, a couple NSCA conferences. I'm not sure what the conferences were at the time, because personally I really didn't give a fuck, and I just wanted to learn more about the training. So I was along for the education. So I was more the demo guy. Excuse me. You know, Dave, show them how to squat. Dave, show them this, and so forth. And after, oh man, I would say probably close to 50. I mean, there was a lot that were kind of strung together there. So it may not have been 50, but it was like 50. It's after a lot, let's just put it that way, but it wasn't a ton of them. I do believe it was Ball State, but I could be wrong. It was definitely Midwest, and it was a 3 or 4 hour drive, or whatever it was. And we were in a weight room, and Louie was presenting, and it was a class full of students, and I think they were just kids that were taking the weight training class, to be honest with you, because half of them didn't give a fuck at all. And Louie's, giving his presentation, speaking about the conjugate method, and I love the guy like a father. He was like a father to me, so I'm never going to say anything to disrespect him in any way whatsoever. But if anybody's listened to him speak, you really need to pay attention. I do think that he is a genius when it comes to strength training, and nobody's going to convince me otherwise. But with genius comes the innate responsibility of the student to really pay the fuck attention, because he will bounce around like crazy. So he'll be talking about the deadlift, and you'll be really interested to know what the difference is between pin pulls and block pulls. And then he'll start talking about the squat, and then the bench press, and then Melsif, and he might not ever get back to actually finishing the thought about the deadlift, but there are 10 or 12 other thoughts that happen between it. Usually he does circle back, but you gotta keep your focus, to be able to follow him, because his head bounces around in so many different places at such a warp speed that I don't think it's, when you're at his level of experience and knowledge, I don't think it's his responsibility to have to bring that down to speak to other people. And cases like him, and very few others, but cases like him, I think it's the responsibility of the student. But anyhow, during this time, he was doing it big time. I mean, I'm almost laughing to myself, like, man, these kids have no fucking idea what he is talking about. And about 3/4 of the way through, I look out, and there are people sleeping 15 yards away from where I'm sitting on a bench, and he's like writing on a chalkboard, so maybe 10 yards away. I mean, it was not that far away, but there were people sound asleep on the fucking floor. And just looking throughout the weight room, I don't think one person was actually paying attention. And it was, while I want to say it was disrespectful as hell, it was also something that we should have picked up on. I should have picked up on sooner. I was just kind of in my own world, just waiting for him to tell me, show him a JM press, show him a Paul Dix press, so I'm just not really paying attention myself. And, but when I saw it, I did my best to get Louie's attention and asked him to give me 10 minutes, just give me 10 minutes at the end of his presentation to wrap things up, just to summarize it. And when he was done, I grabbed a piece of chalk, hit the chalkboard, and within 15 minutes, 10 minutes, right around that time frame, I wrote out a basic template for everything that we were doing in the gym. And I remember, as he was doing the Q&As, and I sat back down on the bench and I looked up at the chalkboard, I looked at it and I thought, holy crap, this shit is so simple. This is so easy to understand that I don't understand. Now I see why there's such a vast disconnect, because on one end it's so simple that it's ridiculous, and that's what I'm going to present today. But on the other end, it can become so complex that it ties your brain in knots. And where Louie specializes is in the complexity, how to mold and shape the conjugate system for basically anything. I love the conjugate system for maximal strength development. So when people will ask me, well, how would you use conjugate for strongman? How would you use it for football? How would you use it for... A lot of times I bounce that out to other people. I'm like, you know what? I've worked with a very limited number of strongmen, a very limited number of football players, not enough to be able to sit here and actually give you an answer. I can give you, the template that everything operates by and the philosophy of it, but that's not, I don't do that, and I'm not in the profession of consulting anymore, so I don't, that's not where my core skill set lies. Even though I can, if I sit down with a coach and do consulting with a coach, I can help them tremendously because I have that feedback from them. But for me to just sit and present or to write or to do anything to say, here's how you should do conjugate for football, where I've never actually applied it in that setting outside of a couple people, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stay in my zone that I know very fucking well, that very few people, I think, and this is going to be my ego speaking, very few people know as the same as what I do when we're in that zone and in that area. And, if those, the people that do are the people I love to speak with, not to debate, because I can learn shit from them all the time. And then that helps because every lifter is different. Every lifter is going to have different needs and analysis and so forth. And I like working with lifters and trying to take them to the top, the best they can be. Beginners are pretty simple to train. That's why online training is such a popular service now, is if you're dealing with a beginner or an intermediate, it really doesn't matter what you have them do. They're going to make progress. The downfall of that is the lifters think that they need that coach for that progress, and the coach really had very little to do with the progress. So when they can't afford the coach anymore, the lifters quit. So that's a downfall of that, but I'm not here to speak about that. So before I get going into this, what I want to do, because one of the criticisms, I guess you could say, or feedback that I've gotten from the table talk is that I don't answer the questions. So Josh, I really can't read this on my iPad. Do you see any questions now that I can pop out real quick? Because I really don't want to be blowing people's questions off, because their time's just as valuable as mine.
Yeah, let me look at them right now.
I see one that says band tension for Circa Max. I'll try to circle back into that later, but that it depends. It depends more so on the own lifter's ability than it does a sport or how much you lift.
All right, we got one that says, what would be good advice for a power lifter that is very explosive on dynamic effort days but kind of sucks on max effort days?
Wow, that's me, dude. That's how I was. I suck so bad on max effort days. My advice to you is don't let max effort days frustrate you. That was one of the things that it would fuck up my whole week, because our max effort lower body stuff was on Monday, and it's like I didn't have a chance to redeem myself until Friday for dynamic work, or that next Monday, and I sucked, man. I was squatting, 250 to 350 pounds more than some of the people in the group I was doing max effort with, and they were beating me on everything that we did. But that wasn't my core competency. My strengths was the explosive strength. So what I found was on certain max effort exercises, like the good morning for one, I did better not doing max effort work with the good morning, but doing submaximal work of 3s and 5s. So anytime the good mornings would rotate back into the program for max effort work, I'd do them for 3 to 5s, 2 to 3 sets. The 2 or 3 sets was based upon how I felt. So if set 1 felt really good, then I did another one. If that felt really good, then I did another one. If that one felt kind of crappy, I stopped. So I never had I have to do the 4 sets because of the volume has to be X. It was all auto-regulated, because I also had a really hard time recovering from the max effort work. I also learned that I had to be very selective on my max effort exercises. And for me, the ones that I could make progress on, board presses, reverse band presses, yoke bar, low box squats, trying to think of some of the other ones, pin 1, pin 3 pulls, deficit pulls, all those I could make progress on and, you know, kind of chip away, getting stronger. Those were the ones that I cycled in. West side, I mean, you kind of did what everybody else did, but, you know, if there's something you really wanted to do, you just made the suggestion as soon as you know, first. But there were other ones that would be like anything that was suspended was awful, and I never got better at it. So from my squat went up 200 and some pound, like 250 pounds, and my suspended good morning never left 455. You know, but that became my test of strength. Louie likes to talk about testers and builders. I define them a little bit differently. For me, the testers were things like floor press, the suspended good mornings, the things that just, no matter what I did, they just would not get better. But if I couldn't do on the suspended good morning, if I couldn't do the 455, then I knew my training was fucked. If I did it and it was okay, then I knew my training was on par. If I did it and tried, which was occasionally, you know, 10, 20 pounds more, and missed it, my training was okay, but it was probably stupid to even try. So I learned after a while to just stop trying on those movements that were testers and just hit the weights that I knew were my test weights to kind of tell me if things are on point or not, and then to shut it down there. So, and then to put all the focus on the speed work and to not let my speed work become too heavy, that it had to move with force. And if it got to a point where it was moving with not enough, it was moving too slow, then my strength would start to suffer. The other thing that I did in both the bench and the squat was, if I felt good on the dynamic days, and this is regardless if it's straight weight, chains, or bands, and keep in mind, I was there for 5 years before we even had chains or bands, so it was all straight weight, and then it was chains for like a year, maybe 2, and then bands kind of came in. So we had our own little progression built in just based upon how things kind of came into the system. Is if my speed sets were feeling good, and right about 5 or 6 sets in out of the 8, then I would make a decision in my mind that after 8 I'm gonna work it up. And you know, sometimes we call it taking a weight, or you know, so I still did the doubles, or if it was the bench it could be a triple, maybe sometimes a single, but I worked up. So what I was trying to do during those time periods, and this might be once every 2 phases, so once every 6 weeks, I wanted to transfer the speed into the heavier weight, because if I wasn't able to transfer it into the heavier weight, what good was it? So that was another thing that I did, being that my max strength was one of my weakest components. Was, I don't want to say I did max effort work after the speed work, because it really wasn't that, because there was pre-fatigue from doing the speed work, and by no means was I holding back on the speed work. That was still being hit just as hard, if not harder. It's just after that last set, it's like, okay, this was really fucking good. Let's throw a quarter on. You know, let's throw a plate on. And a lot of times at Westside, that's where a lot of the contest, you know, and that's where a lot of the competitiveness would come out, because if somebody else started working up, then you felt like you had to work up too. And I got caught up in a lot of that shit where I shouldn't have worked up sometimes. But you know, that kind of comes with the territory. But had I not worked up ever, then I don't think I would have been able to build my strength to the degree that it really was. When we got to the point where we started playing around with a lot of really heavy band tension, multiple bands per side, then I really dialed back the max effort work a lot to where it wasn't, you can call it a max effort day just by name, but from a training standpoint, it was submaximal work and a lot of work on the supplementals and the accessory work. That's how I handled the training, being somebody that was more explosive than I was strong. Other lifters that I've had that have been more strong than they are explosive, I kind of work kind of the opposite of that. So I put a little bit more emphasis on, the max effort stuff, but then I'll take the training percents on the dynamic day up a little bit more. So it actually moves a little bit slower than what I would like it to move, but I want to fit the need of the lifter that I'm working with. And this is where at the very beginning I talked about it can become very simple, or how this is very simple, but it can become very complex. Everything I'm talking about right now is more of the complex side, which really only pertains to lifters who have probably already totaled their elite or above. So if you're an intermediate or a beginner lifter, this doesn't mean shit. It doesn't mean anything. The reason why you're not as strong as you are fast is because you're just still weak, or vice versa. The reason why you're not moving weight with a lot of force is because you're not strong enough to produce that force yet. And yes, it's relative to percentage, but it's also relative to muscular coordination, neuromuscular coordination, and skill with the barbell. So those things are factors as well. Any other ones that you got in there?
Yeah, let me see here. Hold on, it's loading right now.
I see one in here that says, going from linear periodization to conjugate, do you wish you would have started conjugate sooner? Yeah, I do. I wish I would have started it about two or 3 years sooner than what I did. Linear periodization worked very well for me. And while I know the negatives of linear periodization very well, I also know the negatives of conjugate very well, and the negatives of block very well. And I also know the positives of all three of those. For me, what happened with linear is I just got to a point where no matter how I manipulated the training cycle in regards to intensity, the percentage of the weight being, or the weight being lifted, or how I progressed, if it was completely linear or non-linear or undulating, or however I did it, it just wasn't making a difference. It was all leading to the same end result, which was my ability to be able to do more for a triple in the gym than I ever ended up maxing out in a meet. And then the injuries, that's where the bulk of my injuries actually started to happen, because every training cycle just led into a fucking brick wall where you're going to accumulate micro trauma, little injuries, muscle pulls and stuff like that. I think that kind of comes with the territory. The injuries I'm talking about were, like big, bruised hamstring pulls, quad pulls, pec tears, stuff like that is, running into those 4 weeks out from a meet and then scrambling around trying to figure out how you're still going to make it to a meet after meet after meet was just, it's frustrating, and it pisses you off, because you've already started lifting weights that build your confidence to where you're going to set a PR, then all of a sudden it's like, fuck. And the constant was that linear shit, and I kept thinking that there's just something I'm missing, something that I'm not getting right with this. And so I looked at recovery. I covered all the bases. It's just, for me, after doing it for like 6 years or something like that, with the exception of 2 years bodybuilding, 3 or 4 meets per year. I mean, that's a lot of training cycles using the same basic type of philosophy. I think my body just got too used to it, that if I would have broke away from it sooner, I think I would have avoided some of the bigger injuries that I had as far as major muscle strains and tears. But at the same time, I knew Louie at the time, and Louie was helping me at the time. I just didn't buy into it. And I think a big part of that not buying into it is what led me to take a deeper dive into trying to figure out why it worked after I did see and after I did embrace it. Because a lot of people will do conjugate training and they'll make progress from it. And they'll do it because, you know, they hire a coach to help them, or they train at Westside, or whatever the hell it's going to be. Not very many people do it because they don't want to do it. You know, so that was kind of the situation I was in. Is I came to Westside and I wanted the atmosphere, I wanted the training, but I wanted the atmosphere, I wanted the coaching, I wanted the technical coaching, but I didn't want the training. So I avoided it until I had to do it or be thrown out. And then when I had to do it and all my lifts went through the roof, and with my background with linear and everything else, I not only wanted to reap the benefits of being stronger, I wanted to know what the fuck I missed all those years before. And that's where, you know, the deep dive into all the Russian manuals and all those this is before super training even came out, you know, was trying to extract all the information from those manuals. And then super training was like a godsend, because it was able to take not everything that's in the manuals, but enough that was in the manuals to really provide more clarity to it, and then to understand it far greater than if I would have just done it. And so I don't think I would have done that if I didn't have that adversity of 4 or 5 meets trying to get my damn total to move. I mean, the lifts are moving. I think I needed that to put myself into position to learn the next phase of what my training life was going to be to its full extent. Is conjugate method good for powerlifting? Is it good for your first powerlifting meet? Or is it...
Or after is what he's saying, so...
Depends. You know, I think the best thing that you can do for your first powerlifting meet is to find another powerlifter to train with. I really do. And I don't care how they train. You know, fuck it. It doesn't matter. You're going to make progress no matter what. So find somebody else to train with, and your technique is going to become so much better. Even if their technique isn't the greatest, your technique is probably going to be worse than what theirs are. So even if they don't ever show you how to do anything, you're going to mirror kind of what you see, and the technical aspect is going to be more important than the actual training aspect for the first year or so of training. So I would worry more about that than what style of training you're actually doing. I think that's one thing that beginners need to kind of take a step back and focus on way more than what they do. You know, everybody wants to talk about training methods and all this other kind of stuff, but they don't want to step back and really, really reassess their technique. And I can validate that with every Learn to Train seminar that we've ever done, every seminar that I've ever done, any powerlifting experience. You know, when we have groups of people, you know, lifters, over a dozen of lifters at every seminar, breaking all-time PRs when they're not even here to actually work up and max out by 50 pounds. Sometimes we've had people break PRs by 150 pounds. They didn't get 150 pounds stronger. Now, the environment, yeah, maybe that's going to give them a little bit of hype, but not 150 pounds. they already could lift the weight that they did, that was that 150 pound PR. They just didn't have the ability to display it. So it's that technical skill that gives you the ability to actually display the strength that you have. So that's where the biggest gains come from in powerlifting. If you're a beginner or even if you're an advanced, there's always got to be assessing the technical aspect. Yeah.
All right. Thoughts on doing only partial range, floor press, board press, if you get pain at the bottom? And someone else commented on that and said, should I ditch the bench for a bit and focus on low ROM movements?
If you have any type of shoulder pain, pec pain, elbow pain, anything like that, see a doctor. I mean, that's going to be my standard answer. Is you got to find out what the root cause of the pain is. That should always be first priority, and the best person to ask for that is not somebody via DM on Instagram or AMA or in the gym. The best person to ask for that is somebody that is a physical therapist or sport medicine doctor or orthopedic that knows what the hell they're talking about. I highly suggest anybody that's going to get in this sport, and wants to push the boundaries and be the best they can possibly be, to befriend and find a sport medicine doctor that you see on a regular basis. Just build a relationship. I'm not saying that you're going to be friends with the guy and go out have beers with the guy. I'm just saying you have to build a relationship with the doctor so they know you and then you know them, and it takes time because they don't want to get sued, and they don't know what the hell you're in there for. They don't know if you're just a stupid meathead. If you take all these things, like you go in to see the doctor, you're going to assume the doctor, dislikes training and dislikes this and is an idiot and doesn't know anything about the training. So every assumption that you have towards them, they have towards you. So that's a boundary, and that's got to be broken down. And the only way that can happen is over a period of time. Just because you see a sport med doctor doesn't mean they're going to want to send you to somebody to operate on you. It could just be, look, you just need to take time off. Well, then ask, what do you mean by time off? And don't be a dick about it. Be specific about it. Do you mean time off just that movement? Or do you mean time off totally? And why the time off? Try to learn why they're giving you the answer that they're giving you, because it's there. It's just they get asked the same stuff over and over, time and time again, and they don't know if you really give a shit or if you don't. So it's a fucked up basic communication skill that's part of life. If you're use an analogy, if you have a child that's in elementary school and you go to a parent-teacher conference, most parents don't give a shit about their kids' education. So the teacher's whipping through these conferences left and right, because why should they waste their time explaining something to somebody who really doesn't give a shit? I'm sorry, but that's the way it is in most places. Now, if you show that you actually give a shit, then you're going to find that you're going to have a teacher that's emailing you, letting you know, look, your kid doesn't turn the assignments in on time, and you find out, not all teachers suck. I'm getting off track, but anyhow.
Well, we got some more here.
Well, with that, what I want to say is, I want to answer the question is, if you do have the pain, the limited range of motion is the way to go. I live with shoulder pain that I will have for the rest of my life until I decide I need to pull the trigger and have my shoulder replaced. So there's rare times I'm able to touch my chest, but not often. So I will stay with the shoulder saver pad. I will stay with the floor press. I will stay out of pain at all cost. And I'm not competing ever again. So I'm going to stay out of pain at all costs at all times. Now, if you're going to compete, you're going to have to deal with a certain degree of pain, but keep in mind that your range of motion, I like to kind of think and have people think of it in terms of isometrics. If you do isometric training where you push into a band or you pull into a band, not a band, but a pin, and you statically pull, as hard as you can, or statically push as hard as you can, that's going to carry over a strength 10 to 15 degrees plus or minus that range of motion that you're in. So if your pain is 10 degrees, lower, say it's than where you're pushing, then you don't have to go to threshold and build where it is. This is something that I see a lot of people do, is they'll find and they'll do a movement, say it's a bench press, and it's like, oh shit, my shoulder hurts when it's coming like an inch off of my chest. So I'm going to do isometric work, or I'm going to work that area that's 1 inch off of my chest. So they go right into the pain. They don't go through the pain. So they just go right to the pain and then work from there. What I'm telling you is to stay 5 to 10 degrees off of the pain. So figure out where the threshold is and then get 10 degrees out of it, and you're still working that range of motion without having to deal with further injury or the pain. So from a positive standpoint of that, you're able to train with the heavier weights, which is going to be able to keep you stronger. Where if you go down into the pain or you try to work through the pain, the weights have to be dropped. Now there are other injuries and so forth where you're going to have to work through the pain, but that's a conversation for you to have with the physical therapist. You said you had another one?
Yeah, we got a couple. How would you apply conjugate for someone without access to special equipment, bands, chains, specialty bars, etc.?
You don't need all that shit. When I came to Westside, we didn't have all that shit. There were no bands, there were no chains, we didn't have fucking boards. I think there was a safety squat bar. There was a cambered bench bar. There was not a giant cambered bar. I got an article somewhere where it's the 100 things that I saw during my time at Westside, and you'll see the progression of all the stuff as it came in. I mean, we used to use the shit out of a device called a man array that pops on a bar. It kind of allows you to do a higher bar squat, and so that became a max effort exercise. But you don't need all that shit. All we had was a gym that had several racks, benches, barbells, plates, and dumbbells. I mean, the same basic shit everybody else has. Now we did have, the maybe the second to the when I first got there, the reverse hyper was made out of wood with pillows and shit taped over the top of it, and I don't even think it didn't even have a lever at the time. You just somebody had to strap the weights around your ankles. So we did have that, so I guess from a specialty equipment standpoint, we had a big giant box that you jumped on, for the reverse hypers, and for belt squats, we had a platform with a big hole in the floor. So there was that kind of stuff, but you don't need all that. The speed work is still the dynamic work. You just do that with the barbells based upon the percentages. You don't, when it comes to max effort work, you can do thousands of exercises with just a barbell. There's many variations of a good morning. There's many variations of a squat. There's many variations of a deadlift. So you start throwing in close stance, medium stance, wide stance, box height, no box, high bar, low bar, off pins, suspended. You're all of a sudden your max effort exercises are now going through the freaking roof. And most of the supplemental exercises don't really use specialty equipment anyhow. Now, the specialty equipment, will it expedite your process? I'm going to say no. If you're a beginner, you're going to make progress pretty much at the same rate as everybody else. If you're an intermediate, I'm going to say yes, possibly. But there's no way to know really for sure. because there's a lot of intermediate lifters that have become multiple world champions training in a one-car garage with a rack and a barbell and maybe a lat pull-down machine at best. So if there's a will, there's a way. So you don't need all the stuff to do conjugate training. Now, if you're going to do conjugate training over a period of 10 years, 5 years, 6 years, then yeah, they're going to have its application. Now, aside from that, bands are fucking cheap. So if you want to add something in, as another option, a pair of mini bands thrown to a barbell for a bench press on most people just took every bench press variation that you have the potential to do max effort wise and doubled it for, hell, they're on sale now. So for $15, so there's that.
Okay. What are your thoughts on Larry Wheels, and have you seen similar talents like him before?
I don't know him. I don't know him personally, so I don't like to give thoughts on. I'm not going to give thoughts on somebody I don't know, because that's kind of stupid. I'll say I respect his strength. I mean, the dude is strong. I mean, there's no doubt he's fucking strong. That's really all I can. I don't know him. If I knew him.
So have you seen similar talents like that before? Where
Oh
they're
yeah,
just a freak.
Oh yeah.
Who would be the ones that you'd say maybe kind of compared in that regard?
I'm going to go with the ones that I personally saw. I mean, Rob Fusner was unfucking believable. I mean, coming to Westside, and I mean, it's just, we would have people that would come in, and Rob did utilize a lot of his talent. He just unfortunately ended up tearing his pec, and had some other problems kind of happen close to the same period of time. But who knows what he could have went on to do. I mean, he was just so freakishly strong. And everything he did was easy. Joe McCoy was kind of another one that was like that. It's like they're doing max effort work, and it's like, dude, you got 50 pounds more. And he's like, nah, I'm done. And maybe they didn't have 50 pounds more, but it just seemed like everything they did was effortless. And I'm not saying that they didn't work hard, because everybody fucking worked hard, that was there. But, throughout the sport of powerlifting, when I was lifting, these people were kind of easier to see, and they're easier to find because they were kind of rare. Like Gary Frank hit the scene, it's like, holy shit. Ano Tottori, when Ano hit the scene, like, what the hell just happened? They come out and they just lift these weights. You're like, what the fuck just happened? And, when Goggins squatted 1100s in one of those, I mean, it's just like, what the fuck? And it raises the bar for everybody else. But it was the sport was a little bit more underground. It's I don't want to say it's in the spotlight by any means, because it's still underground. It's nowhere near popular, from any standpoint. But it is drawing in more lifters, and lifters that getting lifters a little bit earlier, to where I think one of the first articles I wrote for Powerlifting USA was called Strength. And I said the majority of powerlifters are made up of high school athletes that really weren't good enough to play in college, or athletes that did play in Division I, or maybe a little bit in the professional, and then retired and came down to powerlift. And that was kind of the majority of the sport, is from the talent standpoint. And then people that just didn't participate in any sport whatsoever and found their way into training because they love training. But that's kind of what it was, where now I think we're catching some people that would have had the genetic ability and potential to do very well in, say, football or other sports, but they're being exposed to powerlifting before that, or they just don't like that, and then they're exposed to powerlifting, so then they come over and it's like, what the fuck is that? And they're easier to see because there's more of them, because there's more lifters, and the more the sport grows and the more lifters that come into the sport, the more we're going to see that, and that's why records will always be broken, because these special athletes, and that's what they are. They're special athletes. If it's going to be powerlifting or whatever sport they're going to find their way into, they're going to be special no matter what sport they're in, as long as they're genetically inclined, for the skill sets of that sport. And they're amazing to see and they're frustrating, they're frustrating if you're not one of them. They can frustrate the shit out of you, but don't let it frustrate you, because the older that I've gotten and the further I've gotten away from competing, the more that I look at this and it's like, wow, this is fucking cool, because even if they don't have to work as hard, and they do still work hard, so I don't want to take that away from anybody, but even if they don't have to work as hard, or they don't have to put in as many hours in the gym, and they end up breaking all-time world records and all that, they still move the mark up for everybody else. And there's a lot of driven people in this sport that may not have that same genetic ability, but their drive will push them to beat that fucking number. It's just they may not have had that genetic ability to be able to get the number in the first place, but somebody else hits it, then their drive kicks in, and then that's the great part about powerlifting is, and what we don't know is, how long the lifters are going to last, and to really do crazy shit. When I was competing and it was all gear, and it took a decade or so, now it doesn't take as long, but I don't know, and I haven't really paid attention enough to really follow people to know how long they last. I don't know how long they're lasting compared to how long lifters were lasting 20 years ago, if it's even important, so that's a whole nother thing. But the kid's strong, and he's not going to be the only one. There's going to be other ones. It's just, what can we do as a sport to keep them in the sport? That's one of the bigger questions I have. I really don't like federations, and I don't want to get into a rant of that, but I really don't like them at all. But what are they doing when these type of athletes come into the game? What are they doing to keep these guys in the game so they can actually maximize their potential? Because they're not going to stay around long, because, at some point in time, they're going to have to pay the bills, and, that's the route that they're going to go. But I do kind of hope with Larry, for example, and I don't follow him that close, but I know he did some strongman stuff, and I really quit paying attention to whatever he was doing. I'd like to see him, I'd like to see what he could do if he took 6 months and just, said, fuck business, fuck social, fuck all this stuff. Just have somebody else handle all that and just train for a meet, and that's it. Just take all this other crap out of your life and just focus on one meet, see what happens. I think that would be really fucking cool to see. I don't think we're ever going to see it, because it's just not how the real world works, but I think it'll be real cool to see. But I think before that, we're going to see somebody else pop through.
All right. How to assess and practice technique in the conjugate method?
It's built into the dynamic work. So when I start laying out the template, okay, I'll explain that there.
Let's see. Let's just rip through a couple more here quick. Should an athlete, fighter, run a conjugate program or something like 5-3-1 in terms of general strength, in your opinion?
Whatever you're the most comfortable with. I'm assuming that it's the actual athlete who's asking the question. Any training that you do with weights is GPP for you. SPP for you is what you do specifically for your sport. So whatever you feel the most comfortable with, use. If you have, a strength coach or somebody that can help guide you through this, that knows MMA or is willing to work with who's helping you in the ring, then put them together and make them work together, because you guys are already doing an ass load of work as far as training. So recovery is a part of training. So, and it's when I hear MMA, that now resonates in my brain the way that wrestlers used to resonate in my brain, and they actually the same way wrestlers still resonate in my brain. You know, just guys that are willing to fucking train 12 hours a day and eat carrot sticks if that's what it takes, you know, to be able to win. And a lot of times that's what they end up doing, you know. So you got to be real careful of what you're throwing on top, because as soon as it spills over and you're not able to recover from your SPP, then you start to become a worse fighter, you know, and slower and getting your ass kicked, which isn't the goal. Your goal is to kick more ass. So if you don't have the people in your corner to be able to guide you, go with what you're comfortable with and start on the low end. Like when you look at that training day, ask yourself, what's the most important part of this training day? And then just do that. All right. So say I have one training session, there's 4 movements. You're going to look at it and say, okay, what's the most important? Well, obviously the first movement or 2. So you're just going to do the first 2 movements and forget the rest. And then slowly add the rest on as you become better conditioned with the strength, as long as time allows, because, you know, you only have so much time in a day, and you have all the other training that has to be done as well. So that would be my advice with that. I could help a lot more, you know, if I was sitting with somebody personally and kind of knew the whole training schedule, but that's probably the best, easiest answer I can provide that actually gives you some guidance.
Would you use rest pause DC style for supplemental exercises, or would straight sets be better?
Mix them up. No, sorry. For accessories, mix them up. After I lay out the template, if you're still around, ask the question again, and then it will make more sense when I lay the template out. But I do definitely think there's a place for it, because instead of doing, say, 6 sets of shoulder work, or, you know, more the accessory work, I don't want to, I call it junk work, but it still has to be done. You know, the faster you can get the junk work done, the better it's going to be, and the easier it's going to be to recover from. So if it's the difference between somebody doing, you know, 6 sets of side raises compared to doing, you know, 1 set of side raises using rest pause or a cluster set or something like that, I would much prefer them just do that 1 set and be done. You know, that's going to be easier to recover from, and then assess how it's working. It shouldn't really make a difference one way or another, but if it has a negative effect, obviously you're going to go back, but I really don't think it's going to have that. I think it's going to be a balanced effect. It's just going to take and make it something easier to recover from.
All right, I think we should get into that live, or the template there.
All right, guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw out a conjugate template, kind of like I spoke about at the very beginning of this podcast. And then from there, I'll go back to, we'll take any new questions because they seem to be streaming in here pretty quick. So once I get back to the questions, if you had a question that you asked that I didn't answer, then please ask it again. And what I'm going to lay out here is probably going to answer most of the questions that you guys have. At the same time, it's probably going to raise more questions. If not, Ethel might ask a couple questions. You know, I'll wake her from the dead. Okay, so with conjugate training, it's basically the coupling, right? It's combining different methods of training. So it's different methods of muscle tension. So it's taking the method of max effort, so the max effort method, the repetition method, and the dynamic effort method, and combining them all together, thus conjugating, coupling those methods. When I speak about the repetition method, I'll speak about it in regards to repetition method. Man, heartburn came back from years ago. So I'm going to have a monster drink. That's sure going to fucking help. I'm going to speak about the repetition method as it's defined, but also what I call a modified repetition method, which is, you'll see. I do feel they are still the same thing, but so you're going to have max. We're going to label the days instead of just having day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. It's easier to understand to say, okay, here's max effort lower body, here's max effort upper body, here's dynamic lower body, here's dynamic upper body. That doesn't necessarily mean that max effort work is going to always fall on max effort day. That's where a lot of people are getting confused. It would be easier if I could go back in time and to explain this all over again. I would say you got a heavy upper body day and you got a fast upper body day, or maybe even a slow upper body day and a fast upper body day, a slow lower body day and a fast upper body day, and kind of go that route, or heavy and light instead of max effort and dynamic effort. Because when people ask me about the max effort method, well, that's working up to a 1 rep max. And the question then is, well, what if I do a triple? Well, it's not max effort then, it's sub-maximal. Well, so-and-so says that's what max effort. You see where the confusion starts to become. It's because the days are called max effort day. So the method that might be used could be a max effort method, or it could be a sub-maximal method. So sub-maximal is just max effort intensities are going to be 90% above. All right, sub-maximal is going to be, you can kind of say pretty much anything that falls underneath that. So you're going to have...
Hey, Dave, a little more to your right.
Here?
Yeah, look at the screen, you'll see.
Yep. Okay. All right, so we're going to have...
A little more to your right. There you go.
Max effort, lower. And let's just say this is Monday. All right, and then Wednesday, max effort, upper. Friday, dynamic, lower. Sunday, dynamic, upper. Now, what I always forget to do is to...
It's not on the screen there, Dave.
Fuck. Okay.
Oh, careful.
Yeah, that's my problem. What I always forget to do... My sound's going to be a little funky.
Here, let me move your mic for you.
No, it's cool. I can move it back and forth. It's just going to move a lot. All right, I'll get this figured out as I'm going along here. This is the first time that we've actually tried to use the table for the table talk. Check that out. I always forget to put warm-up in there. Warm-up really should be before the max effort exercise. With the warm-up, now I'm getting tons of questions. It's like, what do you think about the winning warm-up? What do you think about Rustin's warm-up? What do you think about... there's 5 different warm-ups right now that are popular that I keep getting asked about. I don't give a fuck about any of them. What I care about is what warm-up works best for you. Okay? So you need to do some type of warm-up to prepare yourself for whatever that lift is. It doesn't necessarily have to be a full training session. At the same time, it doesn't have to be doing absolutely nothing and just jumping under the bar. What I will say is, if you're a competitive powerlifter, you better be able to handle longer warm-ups and no warm-ups, because there may be some meets you go to, and for some messed up reason, all of a sudden you find out you're in the first flight and you got to start warming up now. So you're not going to have time to do your hip thrusts and all that other shit. You're just going to get under a bar and go. So as a power lifter, you should be prepared to be able to do that. You actually should be prepared to be able to start with 50% if you actually had to. Otherwise, what are you doing all the training and warming up for? You know, I heard Pavel one time, and I think he wrote this in one of his earlier texts, that a real lifter should be able to actually max out without a warm-up. Now, that's kind of taking it to the extreme, but he's got a point, you know, so I'm not saying that's the case. What I'm saying is you need to find what warm-up is optimal for you, and depending upon what the goal of the program is, integrate whatever it is. I know a lot of lifters that never been injured seriously, you know, that don't do any warm-up. They just start with the bar on squat day and do multiple sets with the bar, and then maybe go to 135 and do multiple sets there until things feel right. When things feel right, they'll take the next jump up and then kind of go up from there. And I'll talk about that here in a little bit. But that's their warm-up. You know, I know other people that have more extensive warm-ups. The warm-ups that I like to have lifters that I work with do, we've actually tried to film it 2 or 3 times so far, and it hasn't really worked out that well. But I like to have them do things to open up I want their hip flexors opened up. I want their ability to be able to push their hips through, squeeze their ass, get their hips through. I want that to be as optimal as it possibly can. There's not a whole lot of multiply power lifters left, and I think half of them train in my gym. So one of the negatives of using a lot of gear is they begin to lose the ability to push their hips through to be able to lock weight out because of all the material that's kind of binding it up. So I like to open that up. And so the warm-up that I have them do, and I'm not saying that this is the best, it's a series of 5 or 6 different exercises which is performed in a circuit, which means there's no break between the exercises. The exercises are light. They're not performed to any type of failure or close to failure, and they may go through the rotation once. If they go through once and feel good, that's all they need to do. If they don't feel like they're ready to actually do the next exercise, which would be the max effort or dynamic work, then they'll go through twice. So I think I have it programmed 2 to 4 rotations, but if one works, it's fine. If it takes 4, it takes 4. But even with the 4 rotations, it's not going to take more than 10 minutes. And some of the exercises that are included in there are hanging leg raises, and we're using straps, so not hanging onto the bar, but using hanging leg raises, using the straps or this harness straps, because I want the lower back to distract. That's the main reason for that, is I want the hips to open up and the lower back to distract. And then if they have to do a knee raise with, a hip tilt, and that's the best they can do, that's where they start. The goal is to get it to where they can actually bring their feet up, legs straight, and kick the bar at the top. That's what I would like to see. Repetitions, I don't even program. So it's 4, 5, 10, whatever they want to do. It's whatever they want to do. I just want, the biggest goal there is to open the hips up and to get a little ab work in. From there, the next is it's a bent knee reverse hyper. So it's not really using the weight. Some of them will use the weight and use the pendulum reverse hyper, but it's just getting the back and getting the glutes firing. So it's more getting the glutes firing that I'm looking at. That's why I like the bent knee reverse hyper, because it's not loaded and it's just focusing on squeezing the ass to get it to fire. Then the next movement may be pull down abs, which I've done videos on. You can search Google to be able to find it. Make sure you're doing it right. You're not planting your ass against the cable, and you're letting the cable pull you up. So the cable machine and the strap is basically held under your chin. So in the top position, it's pulling your spine apart. So it's distracting your spine. Then it's forcing you to, at the bottom, I want the lower back to round over to stretch the spinal erectors, then to come back up again. So by doing this, basically bending over and standing up, with weight, we're getting that distraction, we're getting the hamstrings stretched, and again, we're getting the abs activated from there. Next movements like face pulls, band pull aparts, and glute ham raises. So the glute ham raises might be 1 rep, it may be 3 reps, it could be 10 reps. It depends upon their strength. And that's it. So it's enough to get everything activated and firing. It's enough to get a little bit of a sweat going. It's better than them walking on a bike or walking on a treadmill or riding a bike, and gets them moving. Sometimes if they're late, they don't do it. They just jump right into the mix, and I like that. I don't like them not doing it all the time, but I like them being conditioned enough to be able to jump right into the mix, because that's the whole point of doing warm-up work in the first place, is to warm you up, but to also prepare you to be able to do whatever you need to do if the warm-up can't be done. And I don't think it has to be any more complicated than that. I think it can actually be trimmed down to where if somebody's hips are, they have no issues, their hips are never a problem, getting their glutes through are never a problem, and their abs are never a problem. It can simply be just 2 or 3 of the other movements. So that's it. So there's multiple warm-ups to choose from. Let's put it that way. So choose what you think is going to work best for you, see how it works, and go from there. I will say that some of the exercises that I have put in the warm-up that I just described to you are also exercises that are going to be repeated later in the training session. And the reason I did this and started doing it over a decade ago is they might leave early. People don't like doing abs. People don't like doing ab work, and they don't like doing reverse hypers. So if I put them in there, even if it's really light, as part of their warm-up, then at least they're getting some of it done. All right, it's better than nothing. So if all they do is that and they skip all the other shit, at least something got done for the lower back, the abs, obliques, and so forth. So there is some being done. Optimally, it's going to be done twice on that day. That's kind of the goal. But my safeguard is that, and I try not to tell the athletes that very often, because then they start thinking, oh, I don't have to do this because I already did it. And that's not really the case. So let's just take this day by day, or there's no way I'm going to get this done.
You got more room now, if you can see.
Okay. There's no way I'm going to get this done effectively. So with the max effort lower body exercise, you want to change this. You want to change it every week. Okay? I've done it every way possible. I've had people say, you know what, my guys do real good doing 5s on 1 week and then 3s on the next week and singles on the 3rd week. And if they're a beginner, that makes sense. They get acquainted to the exercise on week 1. They do a little bit of strength work on week 2. It leaves them a little bit of, strength left to hit it on the last week. I think that you can still change it every week, regardless of the skill level of the athlete. You're going to have if it's a beginner, you're going to have less max effort exercises that you're going to rotate through. You may only use 6 to 8 total, where if it's a highly advanced lifter, it's somebody that's done conjugate training for 10 years, they may not repeat the same max effort exercise for a year. They're going to keep rotating it through because they need that different stimulus over and over, all the time. Where a beginner still has to develop that neural efficiency and the coordination skills and the skills on lifting heavy weight. So you want to keep the movements down a little bit. I would say with this, you want to use a mix of good morning type movements, squat type movements, and deadlift type movements. So, and if I was to put a percentage on this, what I used to say, I think I used to put like 10% of the time a deadlift, 40% of the time a squat, 50% of the time some type of bend over, a good morning. So now with the good morning, are you going to do a single? I found over a period of time, no. The good mornings are going to stay submaximal. So they're going to stay, like 3 to 5s are what you're going to work up to, 1 to 2 sets. With the squat, it's definitely going to be a single. With the deadlift, it's definitely going to be a single. All right, so with the max effort exercise, you're going to rotate through each week either some type of good morning squat or deadlift. Now, you're not going to be doing good morning. You're not going to do week 1 good morning, week 2 squat, week 3 deadlift, You're not going to repeat through that same rotation over and over and over and over. What I find works best is if you're working with a group of lifters, let them pick. Okay? Or if it's just you training by yourself, decide when you get to the gym. Don't try to program this shit out. Trying to program this shit out is, I'm going to try not to curse here. It's not smart. All right? So it's fucking stupid. Trying to program this out is just fucking stupid. This has got to seriously be auto-regulated based upon how you feel, and the best time to make that decision is after you've walked into the gym and you've done your warm-up. So if you're thinking that night, man, I want to hit that, low box safety bar squat, I'm going to kill that record tomorrow. You can think that all you want. Then you walk in the gym that next morning and you're like, man, fuck, this ain't going to happen. I got to do some kind of pull. I got to do a high pin pull because, shit don't feel right. My hamstring, whatever, just doesn't feel like it's on point. You want to train things that feel like it's on point. You want to train things that you're excited to do. First off, you're going to put more effort into it. You're going to enjoy it more. And the number one goal of this whole movement is to strain and to teach you to strain so you can learn the ability to strain with heavy weights for different periods of time, say 3 to 5, maybe even 7 seconds. That's the main goal. So you want to change the exercises around enough for variety. And the reason why the deadlift is lower is unless you're built to deadlift, the deadlift is really hard to recover from. So if it's somebody that's built to deadlift, yeah, they can do this way more frequently than somebody that's not. Most people aren't, so the percentages are really irrelevant. You want some type of variation of a good morning, a squat, or a deadlift for that max effort work. Now, there's search elitefts.com, lower body max effort variations. I believe an article will pop up that's got over 1,000 different variations with just a freaking barbell. So you'll find the ones that you like, and then that's what you stick with. Now, how do you work up to it? You go through your warm-ups, and as you're warming up, start with the bar. That was one of the things I learned from Westside, which was kind of a wake-up call for me, is most of the gyms I trained at before that, you would think that a plate was welded on every bar that was in the gym because there was never less than a plate. There was a plate, at least in the gyms I trained at, there was a plate on every bar and every rack and every bench, so that you just started with the plate. You go plate, until you had your training weight. Really fucked me up when I came into Westside and everybody started with the bar. Like, I don't get this. And, over a period of time, I started to understand why. You do the reps with the bar until the bar feels like a bar. And then you'll go, if it's a bench, you'll go to 95 pounds. If it's a squat or a pull, you'll go to a plate and kind of go from there. And then every time you jump up, it's based upon the set that you just did. So if you did 135 and that felt good, and you're doing triples to warm up or whatever you decide you want to do for your warm-ups, doubles, triples, singles, doesn't really matter. I mean, you do want to get some type of work done, so I wouldn't suggest doing all singles on your warm-up. I'm more inclined to like doubles and triples as for all the warm-up sets, just to be able to develop more workload when you start to get to the heavier weights towards the top. And then 10% jumps, probably more along 5% jumps all the way up until you get into that striking range of where your PR is or where you think your PR is. And then knock out the PR by 5 pounds. Or if it's been a long time and you haven't been in that exercise, I'm not a big fan of hitting the PR, but if you want to hit the PR, hit this, hit the same weight that you did before, or, whatever it is. But you want to try to get somewhere between 2 and 4 total repetitions above 90% when you look back. So after you're done with your max effort exercise and you look back at what you did, there should be at least 2 reps that have been done over 90%. So that could be 90% for a single, 94% for a single, and then that's it. You start to get over the 4, then you're starting to push the limits of what you're going to be able to recover from. But that's the same with any max effort exercise that you decide. The second grouping of movements. So we say the warm-up is the first category. The max effort would be the second category. The third category is what I call supplemental movements. Your supplemental movements are going to be the movements that make these movements stronger. So your supplemental exercises are the exercises that are going to make your max effort exercises stronger, or your dynamic effort exercises stronger. They're going to make your main lifts stronger. To make it more easily defined, they're typically always going to be a compound movement of some sort. And the repetition range is usually going to fall somewhere between 3 to 5. And the set range can also fall, in the 3 to 5 range there. So let's say it's the low box squat was done for the max effort work, the supplemental work, what's your weak point? That's where weak point development comes in there. Most people have no idea what their weak point is. So they're like, shit, I can't do this. I don't know my weak points. That's fine. Just assume it's your hamstrings. Most lifters, it's their hamstrings. Depending upon, now you got a lot of guys that are squatting closer and their knees are coming, the shin angles pretty much right where the toes are. So you can start running into quads being the weak point. So squat style depends upon this a little bit. So I still say even if you're that type of lifter, hamstrings are still glutes and hamstrings are a giant driver of the power lifts. So if you don't know what your weak point is, just assume it's your hamstrings. So for the supplemental exercise, you're going to be looking at some type of hamstring movement, like a glute ham raise, an RDL, stiff leg, I'm not really a fan of a manual leg curl as a supplemental exercise, but it can be. Basically, a manual leg curl is the same thing as a glute ham raise, except your knee doesn't drop. There is a difference between a glute ham raise and a manual leg curl. They're not the same. A glute ham raise, your knee and hip flexes at the same time. So the muscles contracting from origin and insertion, it's the same, kind of the same way that you would squat, you'd pull and so forth. If you're doing a manual leg curl, your knee's fixed to the floor, or to a bench, and it's not dropping. So the only thing then that's moving is the hips. So it's a great hamstring exercise, but it wouldn't be one of my top rated. I would put the glute ham raise over that, or an RDL over that. But it can still be done here, especially Louie's machine, the whatever.
Inverse curl?
Yeah, the inverse curl. That's a really good one, especially if they're not strong enough to do the glute ham raises. It's another reason why I put the glute ham raises as a warm-up movement, because even if it's a body weight movement. So even if they can just do negatives, or have to have somebody help them, or have to, do reverse band work, or use a pole, or whatever they have to do to get the reps up, they're going to get them up. So that's my goal, is to be able to get them to where they can do glute ham raises here, weighted, or eccentric only, or dynamically, or we have another article on the website which is 16 or 20 ways to master the glute ham raise, which you can rotate through those and keep the glute ham raise in, is a supplemental movement pretty much all year round. That's how much I believe in the glute ham raise from that standpoint. So the supplemental movement is basically going to be that movement that works on your weak point, but also has an impact on the movement working up the ladder, right? So under that, the fourth group is accessories. I'm going to probably spell this wrong because I'm an idiot. That's my way to spell accessories. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but it's accessories. Same thing. All right, the accessories. Now this is where your ab work is going to fall and must fall. This is where the reverse hypers or low back work is going to fall and must fall. These things have to be done here. I don't like to have them done early on, because you don't want to do all these other exercises with your abs and lower back in a fatigue state. I understand the reasons why you would at certain times, but I'm putting a basic template out there right now. This is it, the simplest that you can possibly make this. So the ab work would be something like the pull down abs, something that's going to be standing. What's standing ab work? Well, it can be pull down abs with a cable. It can be pull down abs using a band. It can be the paleo press. It can be, there's a host. Just search standing ab work. There's a host of things that you can do for your abdominals in a standing position. Why do we want to train them in a standing position? We want to reinforce the rooting of the foot into the ground. And when you're training your abs in a standing position, that weight or that cable or whatever you're doing is going to want to try to knock you off your feet. So you have to grasp into the ground with your feet. So it's indirectly training something that needs to be trained. That's one reason. The other reason why you have to develop your core, I know Nate's laughing right now. You have to develop this shit out of your torso. I've always said the thicker the torso and the thicker the head, the bigger the lifts. So you have to develop the torso. And you lift in a standing position. A lot of sports are done in a standing position. Laying on the floor doing crunches isn't going to do you shit. So you want this in a standing position. I'm a big fan of the reverse hyper because I've seen it. I've seen the benefits of it for 30 some years, maybe even more than that now. And I've not seen maybe one. I've seen maybe one person that couldn't do them because it hurt their back too bad. And even with that one person, I question if that's because their lower back was just too weak. But I'm not a doctor, so I can't make that decision. So I've seen more positive out of it than negative for it to not be there, right? So one of the arguments that goes against conjugate and against West Side type training is the box squats are terrible for you because they're going to fuck up your lower back. Okay, let's just assume that's true. Then obviously the reverse hypers are keeping our lower back from being fucked up. Well, no, the reverse hypers are terrible for your lower back. well, then obviously the box squats aren't that bad for your lower back. So it's the application of the movement, guys. So all the movements, you want to make sure that you're performing with the best technique you can possibly use that you're aware of. So you couldn't be ignorant, on how to do something, but do it to your best ability, to your best ignorance level that you can. So you're always trying to strive to make the technique better on all the different movements. Where technique begins to break down is where joint issues start to happen, where overuse issues start to pile up a little bit more. In the fifth category,
somebody just said, how long are those phases before you would rest and change the weight? I don't know if that's too general of a question.
I understand what he's talking about. Okay, so for the supplemental exercise and for the accessory exercise, you always want to, you can stick with these exercises for as long as you like. The max effort exercise you want to change every week. For me personally, when I was training, my max for my squats at Westside for 8 years, I don't think I changed a single exercise except the max effort exercise. Now, I did change the dynamic waves, which we'll talk about that. My supplemental exercise was always glute ham raises, pull down abs, and reverse hypers. Never, ever changed. I might do other things after that, but those never changed. But how I did them always did. So the glute ham raises one time might have been just pure volume. And this was all based upon feel. So if after I may have a max effort squat day that just kicks my ass, and after that movement I'm already fucking sore, well then obviously I'm not going to go balls out on glute ham raises. I'm going to go volume. So I'm going to say, okay, how many reps can I get over 2 sets? Or how many sets will it take for me to get 100 reps? And kind of go volume from that approach. And then the next time I would do it, it would be med ball eccentrics. So I come to the top, somebody hands me a 100-pound med ball, you lower it, to come back to the top, do 3 to 5 reps that way. Next time may be putting a box underneath the front end or underneath the back end to make it higher, so it changes the angle, which makes it way harder to do. That one we did a lot of. Sometimes it was holding a yoke bar. I mean, we just mix it up. So it always changed. I changed it every single time. I think with intermediates or beginners, if you're going to keep the same exercise, keep it for 3 sessions, which means keep it for Monday, keep it for Friday, and then keep it for the next Monday, and then switch it to something else. And then over those 3 rotations, or the 3 times that you do it, try to either lift more weight or get more reps. And with the accessories, same thing. The accessories you can actually cycle longer. I would say with that one you can probably run out for like 5 weeks, 4 weeks. It's once again, it's dependent upon how you feel. But the accessories again, for me, I kept that the same year round. It's just the only difference was on max effort day I did volume on the abs and the reverse hypers, where on Friday on the dynamic day I made it really, really, really fucking heavy. So on the reverse hyper on Monday it was tight. I called it tight and right. So I did them really strict and really tight. So the repetitions were like 10 to 15, but man, it burnt like crazy. And then on Friday it was loose and heavy. So that's where you loaded the shit out of that thing and then let it swing so it really distracted, the lower back of the bottom, and then flex your ass as hard as you can, to get it up, and that would usually fall in the 5 to 6 range. So those are just examples there, but the accessories can run in phases of, I would say you can take that out to 6 to 8 weeks. Can you see that? Yep, 6 to 8 weeks. Where on the supplemental, maybe three times, and then this is 1 time, for that, and this will be the same as we kind of go through here. The last part of the training is what I call free time, and sometimes I'll give suggestions on exercises that can be done. Sometimes I'll put a time period on it. But, you know, every person I've ever worked with, every lifter, I always know, or have always known, however you want to say it, they all have their exercises that they like to do. And some of them, as long as it's not hurting them, you know, there's no reason why they can't continue to keep doing them. You just throw them at the end of the workout and say, dude, you got 15 minutes. Do whatever you want. If you want to do preacher curls, you fucking knock them out. You know, one arm preacher curls, knock them out. Don't give a shit. Do whatever you want, but it's got to be done during the free time. What happens most of the time is they're not going to do anything. Sometimes they will, but it will be half of what they thought they were going to do. So it's just, it works really good for, it works really good for kids, and it works really good for athletes that really are not, and I'm not talking this whole thing, I'm just talking having a free time period. Works really good for athletes that are doing their weight training as their GPP, because they're going to do curls, they're going to do push downs, they're going to train the shit out of their arms. I'm telling you that right now. If you're a coach, you already know I'm right. Okay, if you don't have benches in your program and you're a strength coach, they're still going to bench. They're just going to do it in their buddy's garage, or they're going to do it in the rec center. So build somewhere in there for them to be able to do it, and then at least it can be supervised. And they're in a fatigue state, so they're not going to be that strong. So they're not even going to be strong enough to do that much damage, you know. And it's not going to, because you're putting a time limit on it, which I like 15 to 20 minutes. And I definitely think you have to put a time limit on it, because if you get somebody that's super motivated on some day, they may be in the gym for 4 hours, all right, which just fucked up the whole rest of the week. So you put that time period on it, let them do whatever they want, as long as it's not something that's going to aggravate a pre-existing injury or something that's stupid for them to do. So I don't need to go into what all those things are. It's just anything that causes pain, you don't want them to do. That can also be a time to put in, I really don't like the word, but prehab movements. If they're an athlete or a lifter that does external, internal rotation movements and think that really helps their bench, well, that's where it goes. You can also have, post-workout restoration time, which would be here, but that's not part of the 15 to 20 minutes. So I could say here.
Yeah, keep an eye on that screen there, Dave.
Okay. Post-workout restoration, but that's not always necessary, because that can happen on the days in between. It can happen at different times. So I'll just put a question mark there. The free time, I don't have to put how often that's going to rotate, because you're not going to program anything in there for them. So that's a basic max effort lower body. Okay, things are going to start moving really quick now. All right, now the max effort upper body works the same way every week. You're going to use some type of press. I can say horizontal being okay, man, I'm going to give you overhead press guys here a little break. 80% of the time, and then vertical 20% of the time. So, board press, floor press, pin press, you guys know all the max effort upper body movements. Everybody knows those. It's, again, you can search those, elitefts.com, max effort upper body. I have also videos that we've done only speaking about the dynamic effort method. I have articles that long form articles on that, long form articles on the max effort method, and long form articles on the supplemental exercises, which when this is posted, I will, when we post it on the site, at least as an article, or I post it in my blog, I will put those articles as links. Sometimes we say that we're going to put them as links in the videos and we forget because we want to get the video up for you guys as fast as we can. So sometimes we forget to go back and do that stuff, but it's always going to be on, at least in my blog, I'll always make sure to keep them in there so they're kind of together. And this will probably end up going on my IG bio link tree, because I think this is going to be a video that I'm going to be referring up 100 times a week to people when it comes to conjugate training. So again, you're going to work up exactly the same way like we talked about with the max effort lower body. Just start with a bar, 5% jumps. If you got to go a little bit lower, work up slow, try to get the 2 to 4 reps over the 90% for that top, and you kind of roll from there. I mean, it's the same thing. Now if it's a vertical, or it's an overhead, if you know how to do it, you know how to brace, you know how to keep your core tight, then a standing overhead press is fine. I prefer a seated, back supported pin press from different levels. I like the forehead, I like the nose, I like the chin. They're easy to remember. So you got your chin level, nose level, forehead level, and then you can work up to, and that's usually going to be a single anytime you're pressing off a pin, because things get really funky when you start trying to do multiple reps off of pins because the bar moves around and stuff like that. So single is definitely the way to go there. Once you get through the max effort exercise, we're going to fall into the supplemental. The warm-up, exactly the same. I use the same warm-up for the lower body as I do the upper body, because the upper body's got the face pulls, it's got all that crap in there too. And it's 2 more times per week that we get to get on the abs and get on the hip flexors and hit the lower back. So same principle with the warm-up applies to all training days. Supplemental exercises. Okay, same thing, man. 3 to 5 sets, working sets of 3 to 5 reps, and it's going to be working your weak point. What's your weak point? Bench press, man, it's going to be 90% of the time it's your triceps. So it's going to be some type of modified extension, or some type of close grip bench. So it can be a JM press, it can be a modified tricep extension, it can be, I'm not big on tricep extensions as far as being, like tricep barbell extensions as far as being, for 5 reps, but rolling dumbbell extensions, most definitely. Anything that it is a close grip or an extension would fall into this category here. So close grip or an extension. Now, yes, your shoulders could be your weak point, but I'm telling you 90% of the time it's not. All right, so we're keeping this simple and effective, and that's where I'm going with. So I'm going with the vast majority. Accessories. Now we're going to be dealing with lats, and I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about the lats here in a second, but for now we're just going to put lats, but then we're going to put shoulders. And it doesn't have to be heavy shoulder stuff. You just have to work your shoulders. You got to get a pump in your shoulders, because if you're going to be doing the OHP, up here, then the shoulder work here can be, the lifters out here use the American angled press bar for overhead presses for sets of 6 to 12 very, very frequently, and they still use the freaking prototype bar, which drives me nuts, but I think they do it just because they know it drives me nuts. So they're using a bar that's basically duct taped together. But the shoulders don't have to be that heavy type of work. It can be side raises, it can be front raises, rear delt raises. I like the battle ropes, doing circuits with the battle ropes. From that standpoint, just pump the shit out of the shoulders. It's especially the rear delts. So this is where somebody asked earlier about DC training. When you're dealing with the accessories, then you can use bodybuilding methods. I suggest you do use bodybuilding methods where you're using slower tempos, peak contraction, strip sets, rest pause, stuff like that, because it's fun, it's something different, and what you're really trying to do down here is to build muscle. That's kind of the goal of this whole section, is to build muscle and to also build stability. So that kind of comes hand in hand with the rep ranges that we're talking about, which down here in the accessories we're talking about 8 to 12 from a rep range. And the sets you can run as high as you want. It can be 4, 8, doesn't really matter. Keeping it, again, very, very simple. Now, when I'm talking about lats, I do believe that the lats should be trained every training session if you're a power lifter. Now, how you want to do that and when you want to do that is up to you. The way I did it is I trained it on Tuesday. I trained it on my off days. That's personally how I did it. And then did it as a little bit of warm-up work on the upper body days. That seemed to be what was effective for me. What I suggest people do is to do all vertical pulling, have 2 vertical pulling sessions a week and 2 horizontal pulling sessions a week. So that way it allows the muscle to kind of recover a little bit better than the contrast being doing a low row and a pull down both on the same day. I'd rather you have like a row day and then a pull down day. And if the row day preferably would fall on the bench days, the better, but it depends on how you're training and if you're doing deadlifts and stuff like that. So the lat should be trained somewhere, even if it's in the free time. So if I put it down here, so it could be in the free time or it could be in the warm up, but they have to be hit 4 times a week. So it's an exception where a lot of times I will stick it in the warm up, but all that really does is stretch out the lats and stretch out the shoulders, which I don't want to do before they're going to squat and before they're going to bench. So I really don't like having it in the warm up, because that's a muscle I want to have tight when they're doing the basic heavier lifts. So I'm not a big fan of that, but if that wasn't the case, and it wouldn't create more issues than benefit, then I would do that. But or if there was no other way, then I would do it. But probably down into the free time or in the accessories, I guess you can put lats and then lats. Now Friday, so the dynamic day, here's the thing. All right, so you're going to have the speed work, which is going to run on a 3-week cycle, 3-week wave. Okay, there are hundreds of 3-week dynamic effort cycles that you can go look and find. So this is one of the biggest causes of confusion, is what percentage should I use. Here's what I do is I'll take a lifter that if I'm not sure where their strength is at and I can't make a judgment on a perceived max, I never want to use a competitive max. I don't want to do that. Lifters sometimes can get too far away from that, especially if they're injured and if it's too far away from the meet and other variables that are associated with that. I don't like to use a training max because I don't like to have lifters work up and actually max out on those movements in training. If I have to, I will, but I don't want to. I like to use more of a perceived max. But for the speed work, it's even easier than that, because what you can do is take one training session that you're going to focus on. It's going to be the very first dynamic training session. And let's say you don't know what speed work you should be using now. Your next dynamic effort session, start with warm up, do your warm ups, all that kind of stuff. Use the bar, warm up, do your training weight. Start with 45%. Hit triples, hit 3 as fast as you can. It's probably going to feel way too light, like you can throw it through the ceiling. Okay, add 5%. All right, so now it's 50%. Do that for a triple. See how that feels. Then go 55%. See how that feels. At some point, you're going to hit a weight that's going to feel like, wow, this is I'm producing some force here, and the speed is good, and this feels good. This is, this, it's not too light. It's still kind of easy, but if I had to do 30 sets of this, I probably wouldn't be able to do it. My triceps, maybe you would, but your triceps would just be on fire. All right. So that's the weight that you're looking for. So let's say that happens at 55%, right? So go to the next percent up. I forgot where I left off. So 55%, then 60%, 65, 70. So you're going to keep working up 5% for each speed set until you start to notice that the bar speed is really slowing down, or your training partner says, whoa, shit, that's way off, where you started. Yes, fatigue is going to play a factor here, but that's fine. There's room for error. Fatigue can play a factor. It's fine. Wherever that begins to fall off, let's say it falls off at 70%. I know, I don't want that on screen. All right, so let's say it falls off at 70%. Now you can't do 70%. And you know where to start. So you're going to go and you're going to start at 55% and then go 60%, 65%. And right there is your 3-week wave. And that will be, say, 8 sets at 2. It could be 10 sets at 2. I mean, there's a lot of different, like I said, there's a lot of different dynamic cycles. You can search that again. I got a whole video just on that. But just the basic dynamic effort squat cycle with straight weight is a 3-week cycle of 8 sets of 2 reps on the squat. So this right here, using what I just said, is the most optimal way for you to figure out what the best dynamic effort training percent is for you. Okay, so you don't have to ask me questions like, well, Dave says you should use 55 to 65%. Louie says you should use 40 to 50%. Matt Wenning says you should use 50 to 60%. Mark Bell says you should use 70 to 80%, and da 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 da. Nate Harvey says this to this, this to this, this to this. I respect all those guys, but I don't give a fuck about that. What I care about is what's going to work for you. All right. So, and you can use a Tendo unit and measure the force output if you really want to get, geeky and technical about it. And where the force output is hitting, right around 8 meters per second or whatever the hell it is, I never relied on those things. So I'm not a big fan of those. So it's kind of hard for me to be legitimate about it, but they definitely do work extremely well for a lot of people. So I just have a bias against it because it can be gamed, and I've seen athletes game it too many times that if you're going to use it and you're going to use it the way it's supposed to be used, then I think it's a great tool, and I think most powerlifters would. But if you're a strength coach or if you're somebody working with athletes, it's bullshit. It just becomes, a dick measuring contest, and their form goes to shit. So this is very simple, especially now. You can even film it and look to see if it's faster, slower, or whatnot. So you do your speed work. Now we're into the supplemental again. I'm starting to find out this is not exactly fast explanation of this.
Effective, not simple.
Yeah, it's actually simple. At least I think it's simple, and it's effective, but it's not quick. So that part was bullshit.
I left that out of the title.
Okay. The supplemental is going to be the same as Monday, man. So it's whatever your weak point is. So it's the hams, right? So it's the hamstring. So you got the glute ham, RDL, stiff leg, the choice of all the things that we spoke about before, any other things that could kind of fit into that category. We already talked about how to rotate it if you want to hit it Monday, Friday, Monday, or if you want to change it every week. It's just you have to have some kind of progression on it to where you're always striving to get better at it. So if I'm changing it every single session, then when I come back to the glute ham raise of the style that I did, the next time I come back to that style, I want to be stronger at it or be able to get more reps at it. So, and I was switching the glute ham raise very frequently. And I was also extremely fortunate that I didn't have to ever write anything down because Louie was like a mastermind of that shit. So I didn't have to. His brain with numbers is something that I've never seen before in my life. So I could simply ask him, look, with a 100-pound med ball, what's my best on, eccentric only glute ham raises? And I mean, he's like, 8. Okay, I'll do fucking 9. And that's kind of how it works. You don't try to bite off more than you can chew. You get the 9, and hopefully you get the 9. You get the 9, and that's it. If I could have done 10, fuck it, I didn't do 10. I did the 9. That way I know there's still something left in the tank. I could have done 10, maybe, maybe not. That'll happen next time. It's still better than what it was. And that's the whole thing, is you need to move forward, with your training progression being better than what you were. And that's way harder to do than what people realize. But when you're a beginner and an intermediate, it's coasting. It's not that hard. You just stick to the basic rules. Don't bite off more than you can chew, and just keep progressing forward, taking the little chunks here and there. And after a few years, you're so much further than that you ever thought you were going to be. Then it gets hard. Then it gets complicated. This is still me trying to keep it as simple as possible. And even if you're more advanced in conjugate, it's going to be a very good reminder on what the very basic part of this all is. And the accessory section, it's the same thing, man. Abs, reverse hypers, lats. Change the exercises, change the sets, change the reps, change how you do it, change something. But it's essentially the same thing. These are almost just carbon copies, except for the emphasis, the first movement. It's pretty much the same shit. You're just changing, the exercises, but the main blocks are kind of hitting all the same stuff, and the free time, is kind of the same for all the days. For the dynamic bench, you'll have your warm up, and Mike, come with me. You're going to have the speed work. This one here, you can run a 3-week phase or not. And you can come up with it the same exact way that I just told you how to come up with it with your squat. So say this ends up being a little bit heavier. Say this is like 60, 65, 70. Or you can just take one and use the flat wave, which is what I did the whole time I was at Westside. It never changed. So it was always the same thing. And actually the percentage over time went down. And I think this is an important point to drive home, that if you're doing, let's say you have, I'll keep it simple and stay with the flat wave. Let's say you have a flat wave of 65% for your speed work and for your bench. And Now let's take it down. Let's say it's 60%. So if you're a 300-pound bencher, it's going to be lower than 60%. But say you're a 300-pound bencher, it's 180 pounds. So you use 180 pounds for 8 triples. So instead of doubles, they're going to be triples. Time under tension is going to be a little bit different. If you are using that 180% and it's a flat wave and you're using it for 20 weeks leading into a meet, and then you go to the meet and you hit 325 and it's easy, you left 20 pounds on the platform, don't change the percent or don't change the weight. Keep it at 180 and get the 350 next time. Let the percent drop the stronger you get, because you're becoming more neural efficient. What we found when I first got to Westside, I was doing straight weight speed work with 365 for half my sets and 405 for half my sets. And this was having a 540 raw bench. Okay? When I left, I want to stay out of when the gear started to get crazy. Several years later, when my bench had gone up, it was a 520 raw bench, I'm wrong. When my bench went up to 585 with a shirt, and the shirt might have 25, 30 pound carryover. It wasn't a great shirt. I was using 245 and 2 chains per side for 4 sets, and 275 for 4 sets. So basically what happened with all of us that were training there is, over a period of time, as we got stronger, if you went to a meet and the weight was easy, then there was no need to change the dynamic work. You just had to repeat what you did and go get what you left on the platform. That made it easier to recover from. It made it easier to mentally prepare for the meet, because you weren't going to really train dynamically with anything that you haven't used before. And this is before the bands came on. Bands changed everything. So as far as that kind of stuff went, bands changed everything. But a lot of people are going to be doing this crap, without bands. And if they're using bands, it's going to definitely change the percentages. Okay. So if you're using bands, the way it changes your percentage is the weight of the band tension at the bottom has to come off the bar. So you can still use whatever these speed percentages are. You can still use those, but if the band tension at the bottom is 40 pounds has to come off of the bar. Okay? With the chains, that doesn't have to come off the bar. Okay? So because the chains deload onto the floor, there's no tension at the bottom. So there's the difference with the chains and the bands, to keep it very simplified. There are other videos to be able to direct you to that as well. Supplemental wise, the difference going on here is it's going to kind of be the same, but the volume's going to be higher, and it can flip-flop. This could be the higher volume, this could be the lower volume. So it's still going to be, some kind of close grip and extensions, but instead of the 3 to 5s, this might be, the 10 to 15 rep range, or vice versa. You can swap it however you want, just so you're not pounding it all the time in that same rep range. So it's allowing you to better recover and build more muscle and not beat the shit out of yourself. And then the accessories, same thing. So it's the shoulders. It can be push downs. Just light bodybuilding stuff as the accessories. And then the free time. If this is being done and I trained in groups of 2. I mean, there's Louie and I were in the same group for a decade, so it was basically us together. And then in the accessory, the max effort work, the group might be 4 or 5, but for the dynamic work, it was 2. We'd get through all this in an hour, easy. I had no problem getting back to work, and I only had an hour and 45 minutes, to be away, to actually be in the gym. So I did have time to get there, do some warm-up work, hit this kind of shit, do sled work, and then get the fuck out. All right. Things that are a layer over top of this are the recovery work, which would happen on the off days. And it can happen at the end of the sessions as well. But say the Tuesday, the Thursday, the Saturday. The biggest takeaway that I got from that is your body will adapt to restoration methods actually the same, if not faster, than it will adapt to training modalities. So those have to also change as well. So the sled dragging and stuff like that, I had a basic sled dragging routine that I used a lot, but I had to break from it a lot too, because just the movement, and flushing the muscle was great for the recovery and the restoration, because a lot of the sled work is concentric only. But after a couple weeks, it wasn't doing shit for me anymore. So I had a week on, a week off, where I used, Louie had the rule of 60%. So I used that where you were starting, so it was actually hard the first time, and then you would reduce by 60% of everything for each session for 3 sessions, then take one off and then go back up to the start again, and then reduce down by 60%. So if it's 100 pounds, the first session, then it's going to be 60 pounds the second, then it's going to be 30 some pounds the third. If it's 10 trips the first time, it's going to be 6 trips the next time, then it's going to be 4 trips the third time. So the distance, everything dropped by 60%. And so that was one of my main forms of restoration on the off days. The other thing was, if I was able to find a decent parking spot at work, then I would walk on the treadmill. If I found a decent parking spot, then I would walk on the treadmill for 10 minutes at a very easy pace, pretty much every day, and not even enough to even sweat. Just a very easy pace, because I was 300 pounds. So I wasn't doing it so much for the cardiovascular benefit. I was doing it so my aerobic base would not fall, because all gains in recovery are based upon your anaerobic capacity and your aerobic capacity. So if your aerobic capacity as a powerlifter on a scale of 1 to 10 is only a 3 and it falls to a 2, you're fucked. All right. If it's a 3 and you decide you want to take it to a 5, it's going to provide 0 benefit. It's just going to become something more you have to now recover from. So you got to find what's optimal for you from that standpoint. And if it does become, higher than what you need, you just back off of it and you let it detrain and then bring it back up again. The key thing is how well you recover from the things that are hardest for you to recover from. So earlier on, somebody was asking about, being more explosive than they were strong. So for me, the max effort work was by far the hardest thing for me to recover from. It felt like I got hit by a truck, before I left the gym, and waking up the next morning was not fun. So that whole next day was hell. And there was a lot of restoration, recovery, hot, cold contrast. I had access to a lot of things because I was in a health club. Whatever I needed to do to be able to make sure that by Tuesday night when I left work at 10, I was at least able to move like a normal person. And sometimes it took 3 or 4 sessions because that beat the shit out of me. The dynamic work was also very hard on me, but usually all that made me do was puke. So it wasn't muscularly hard on me because I was more genetically suited for that. All the recovery type stuff, or all the accessories and supplemental type stuff, I really didn't have that hard of a time recovering from that because I was always used to doing a very high volume, very high workload from a training standpoint. So that was more of my problem there was more not listening to Louie when he was telling me to do less, exercises. Where optimally he wanted it to be around 3 or 4 for me, and I still would have been pushing like 6, 8, stuff like that. Just I thought I had to do it, so it was maybe I did, maybe I didn't. In hindsight, I don't think it really made that much difference. So not down there. I think that when you're on the top end of this spectrum with the max effort work and the supplemental work, those are your most important things. Those are the things that matter the most. You get those right. I'm not telling you to do that or to do this, but if you get those things right, you can blow everything else off. I've seen people blow off everything. I've seen lifters that I trained with at Westside only do the max effort and the dynamic work and leave and blow everything else off and gain like crazy. But they were also your more genetically suited freaks that didn't have to do that stuff, so others had to, it's some like myself had to do even more so than that. So it's a delicate balance when you have to do more than everybody else. And it's not about being the fucking hardest worker in the room. I don't like that statement. I like to be the most effective worker in the room, because that way you optimize and you recover, and then you kick ass when the meet comes around. Anybody can be the hardest worker in the room and then not make it to the fucking meet, so that doesn't really make any difference. I guess I can go to questions.
Okay.
I don't think I left anything out. That's the quick summary. But this is actually, guys, it's if you take the time and you go through here and you digest this is the simplest way to explain this. In the article that I wrote for T-Nation, when I was coming out of the gate for T-Nation, it might have been the 3rd or 4th article I wrote, was called the Periodization Bible Part 1 and Part 2. They're also listed on elitefts.com. So just searching Periodization Bible Part 1, Part 2, you're going to find pretty much this exact template on there to give you like a study guide. And I think the periodization Part 1 outlines all the negatives of the linear periodization. So it's the Periodization Bible Part 2. And if I'm wrong, which can be the case because I'm wrong a lot of the times, then the article you want to look for is called the 8 Keys.
Okay. Is there any risk of getting weaker at first when you switch over from a high volume, high frequency routine to conjugate due to the reduce in volume?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And you know what? That's normal. Okay. And that's going to be part of the risk with switching over from any routine to any other routine, because you're going from something that you're already adapted to something that you haven't adapted to at all. So the risk isn't really in going from what you're currently doing to the conjugate. The risk is coming from going to the conjugate and not being adapted to it yet. Okay, so it's going to take a little bit of time, but it's not going to take as much as what you think.
Okay. This isn't really conjugate related, but you can do it quick. Who was your favorite powerlifter pre-1995?
I didn't have any. I like all powerlifters. I like the ones that I have respect for all powerlifters, man. No matter how fucking strong they are, if respect's probably not the word I'm looking for, because I'm going to say something that's probably not going to be polite in use of that word. But anybody that's in this sport and does this sport through the adversity that the sport can bring, and I'm not talking about the adversity of injury, I'm talking about the adversity of actually hitting a sticking point to where you don't know what the fuck to do and you can't get your total to go up. To be able to stick through that and to break through it and then break a PR total, I have respect for anybody that's able to do that. If it's a 1,100 pound total or a 3,000 pound total, because that takes a lot of strategic thinking. It takes a lot of persistence. It takes a shit ton of failure. It takes a ton of mistakes. It takes a lot of things wrong before you can find that one thing that's right that pops it up. You know, coming back from injury, and I've come back from enough of them, is easy, right? That actually provides motivation. It's like, oh, okay, I tore my pec. Screw it back on. Okay, I need to get back to where I was. Fuck you, I can do that. So you have all that motivation. All right, so that's, in my mind, that's easy. I have respect for people that do it, because a lot of people quit because of that. So I mean, that's another quick area where people leave the sport. But to run into something that you're like, man, I don't know if I can ever get stronger than this, and then to actually do it, that's a whole nother level shit right there, where you got to like take the reins of everything. So that's what I respect, in a lifter. So I can't sit here and say I think this lifter is awesome or this lifter is awesome, because I don't know their story. Let me know their story, then I'll tell you, if it's and if they can't, overcome that adversity, or they quit because they have an injury, I don't disrespect them. I don't dislike them. Not at all. I don't want to come across that way. It's just I have more earned respect for those that overcome that adversity than those that don't, from a powerlifting perspective, not a person perspective. Because there's a lot of people I know that have overcome these types of adversities that I don't like as people at all, that I wouldn't hang out with at all.
Like who?
I'm not naming those. I'm not naming those people, but there's a lot of them. But I respect their lifting and what they did with their lifting tremendously. It's just as people I don't. Then on the other side of the spectrum, there's people I respect tremendously that, did one meet and said, fuck it, this ain't for me. But as people, those are the people I want to hang out with and be a part of my life, because they enhance my life. They don't, drag it down.
Okay, we got another one here. Thoughts on following conjugate as a lower level male lifter? I'm assuming that means beginner, intermediate. For example, 300 max bench, 350 squat, 400 deadlift. It's give yourself more credit, dude. That's more than a lot of people. So can it be better? Yes. I think my thoughts are anybody can do conjugate the same way anybody can do linear periodization, the same way anybody can do block periodization. It's, if you're attracted to it and you're like, man, this is cool shit, then do it, because you're going to do way better at the style of training that you're really into. Because what you're really into, you're going to want to dive in and learn more about it. And when you learn more about it, you're going to learn how to overcome sticking points in certain exercises and technical flaws and all the other kind of stuff. So, there's a lot of roads, to the same destination. There's not just one. Find the road that you like best. Okay. What are your thoughts on using stiff leg and or Romanian deadlifts as a main max effort lift?
I don't like it. I think it's too much strain on your lower back. I think if you're going to do it as a sub-max exercise, like we spoke about with the good morning, I think that's okay. Like if you want to do it for a couple sets of 3 and 5s, no problem. But for singles, no, I'm not a big fan of that.
Okay. Approximately how much time does it take to adapt to a conjugate type of training from a block style training?
It shouldn't take you any time whatsoever. It's so similar to block. I mean, conjugate is almost, I mean, if you think about it and you look at the fact that everything kind of, if you cycle your bench on 3-week waves and then you look at what's actually going on within the program, we could make this conjugate into a block really easy just by how we would structure the supplemental and the accessories as far as sets and reps. It could become it's very, very close to block that it's almost pathetically close. And if you, and I understand that, I'm assuming the person asking me understands and knows block fairly well, so they know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a very close correlation here. The only difference is conjugates kind of taking, all the components, the dynamic speed work and the max effort work, and putting it all in one block, where in block training they're going to separate those, where you will have a strength block, then a speed block, and then you try to put those blocks together based upon how long the athlete can maintain each quality. So we have some lifters out here that can maintain explosive strength for about 5 to 6 weeks. So if I did want to block them, I could actually do so and take all dynamic work out for 4 weeks and maybe stick something in there, after a couple weeks, like box jumps or something like that, or med ball squat throws, something for explosive work, just to kind of maintain it and just use and build a block of just strength on there, and then go right back into the explosive strength component. So it should be a very simple transition. It should not be hard for you at all.
Okay. I know we've done at least one video on this, so I don't know how far you want to go into detail, but how many weeks out from a meet would you do your last max effort pull?
Okay. If you're using this basic simplified system, your last week, the last week before the meet, so meet week, you basically do nothing. So let's just say you're doing nothing. That's not exactly true, but you're doing nothing. So let's talk about that last week before the meet where you're doing nothing. What you would do there is something to occupy your mind. So you might go in the gym and just do a very, very light circuit or you could do this at home. Band good mornings, band push downs, band leg curls, just something to kind of get the blood going. Maybe take a couple 10-minute walks 2-3 times that week. If you're used to normally doing walks. If you're not used to normally doing walks, then don't do that. But you want to move a little bit, all right? And especially if you weigh in and you had to cut weight and you have to get glycogen back in the muscle, you're going to want to have some kind of training stimulus to be able to drive the glucose or the glycogen into the muscle. But that's another discussion. But that's that last week. Now, the Sunday before, which is still kind of the last week, but the Sunday before. So what would that be? 6 days out. That's going to be a dynamic bench training session, as kind of outlined here. But instead of doing the 8 sets, you're gonna do maybe 4 or 5. What you're gonna do is you're gonna go into the speed workout like it's a normal speed workout. When it starts to click, and for a lot of people, it's usually about the second, third, maybe 4th set. It's like that's where you really start to feel the speed popping. As soon as you start to feel that set stop, so it's probably 4 sets, and that's it. Maybe some light push downs for a little bit of a pump, and you're done. That's it. That Friday before, you're going to do week 1 of your dynamic squat wave. So as we have listed here, it would be 55%. And you're going to cut the sets there. So instead of 8, you're going to do 4. That Wednesday of that, now we're in the second week, that Wednesday, so that max effort bench day, you're going to do the safest max effort exercise to do. Okay, so for me, it was like a 2 board press. or a close grip incline, and it's not even going to be max effort. It's going to be maybe a 90%, and that's it. Now that Monday, so now we're getting to about 14 days out. That might be your opener pull off a pin. It depends on how long. For me, I that was the third week. I went 1 week further. So for me, that week there was good mornings for 5.5s. It's something light, like a 405, something easy. And then the week before that would have been probably the heaviest pin pull that I would have done the whole training cycle. I find most people do better at it being 14 days out. So essentially your last deadlift is around 14 days out, your last squat's around 9, and your last bench is around 7.
Okay. Would you add sets to your dynamic effort waves instead of upping the percentage, like 20 doubles at 50%?
It depends. If you're a beginner, then I would just stick to the normal 8 sets, but just push with more effort, push with more intent, so the Fred Hatfield wrote about compensatory acceleration. So you want to push as hard and as fast as you possibly can. You know that your shit, you're doing stuff right when you do your 8 sets of speed work, or let's say you do push and do a couple extra sets, you do 10 sets of speed work or whatever it's going to be, and your forearms feel like they're going to explode because they're pumped so bad. Or on the dynamic work, your lungs feel like they're going to freaking explode. That's when you know that the intent that you're putting in the bar is where it needs to be. For the dynamic effort work to really have an impact, you have to have maximum intent using compensatory acceleration. In other words, if you're only using 200 pounds and your max is 400 pounds, every rep you do, you should be putting 400 pounds or more force into that bar to move that fucker as fast as you can. Every rep that you do of the dynamic sets. Now, your warm-ups, no. There's nothing that drives me more fucking crazy than watching people use a bar and with maximum speed looking like an idiot. You build the speed up as you come into your weight. You're not impressing anybody bench pressing 45 pounds so fast that your back is coming off the bench. And you see it a lot. But that's what I would rather see, is more focus put on the intent. To get off topic and to take it away from this being simple, there are dynamic effort waves that I will use for myself and for others if their conditioning falls off a little bit, because we talked about that aerobic base that has to be maintained. One of the fastest ways I've found to be able to bring that back up is to use the dynamic effort work with a very submaximal weight, like a 50% weight, maybe even lower, and start week 1. Let's say for me it's a safety, I got to use the yoke bar. So say for me it's the yoke bar, and I'll use 2 plates and a quarter per side. So I call it 315 because the bar weighs more. It's really not, but it's what I call it. I'll use that. Week 1 will be 10 sets. Week 2 will be 15 sets. And week 3 will be 20 sets. And the weight stays the same. I just take the sets up. I also take the rest from week 1 being whatever I need. Week 2 to 90 seconds. And week 3 to 60 seconds. And if I really wanted to be kamikaze, I'd go week 4 and try 30 sets at 45 seconds. But I can't handle that shit anymore. Week 3 is enough. The 20 sets at 60 seconds it's enough to be able to get my aerobic base back to where it needs to be so I can recover from the things I need to recover from. And I found it to be about the same with everybody else that I work with. But it's got to be something that you can't do that on week one. So the weight that you pick, that week one, you're going to get the 10 sets and it's still going to be easy, but you're going to be wondering, holy shit, 20 sets is going to suck. So it's got to be a fair weight. So not heavy, but fair. That's a different type of dynamic training cycle, which I wouldn't even say is dynamic, so to say, because it's more focusing just on the conditioning component, but it has its place, and that's where I would put something in like that. I wouldn't just add extra sets, to add volume unless you've been doing this for a long time. If you've been doing it for a long time, then I'd rather see if you can maintain that intent with 4 reps or 5 reps, and then see if you can do 8 sets of 5 or 5 sets of 5 or something like that, where you can maintain that intent on the 5th rep and technique on the 5th rep that you can maintain on the 1st. That way the density of the training becomes a little heavier. Training density is how much you can get done in a certain period of time, where by taking and doing the 5 5s at the same rest period, it's not extending the time in the gym, it's actually going to bring it down some. So it's going to take the training density up, which is another factor and component of training that can be cycled and waived.
All right, 2 more quick ones here. Where do I fit in isometric work?
There's a lot of different variants of this. You can fit it in as your max effort exercise. I don't think that's really the best. A quasi isometric would be, and that's where you actually have weight on the bar and you would pull into a pin. So say you're a 700-pound puller, and you're pulling into pin 2, you use 405 or 495, and then you pull that into pin 2 for whatever time you want to use. If you're going to do that type of isometric work, then it could be max effort work. If you're going to do just regular isometric work where it's a bar and you're going to use maybe 3 different positions, so say, because keep in mind the isometrics, as I talked about before, plus or minus 10 to 15 degrees, so 3 different positions is pretty much going to cover an entire lift. I would put it at the very end of the workout. I would make it the last thing that you do, and hit it there, because it causes a lot of fatigue, great fatigue, and it's really hard to recover from. So I would stick it at the very last thing, because it's just the bar. But you need to make sure that when you push, a couple things with isometrics that I found. You do not want to slam into the pin as hard as you can. And this has nothing to do with the pins or your bar. It has to do with your frickin' joints. You want to push into the pin or pull into the pin, and then once that tension's there and you know that your technique and your body is in the right position, then lay into that maximum force. For how long? Again, that's going to depend upon the person, and I usually will have a 3 count, to start with. Some people can maintain more, but if that max tension starts to diminish, then I believe it was a wasted set. So you want to keep it to where that max force keeps increasing, and then you stop before it begins to decrease. So a good time to start would be probably a 2 count, and then go from there.
Okay, here's a good one to end on. Really good question here. Hello, Dave. What would be the best place to get information about building good form for powerlifters who want to start, in your opinion? Books or articles online? What do you got? Do you know of a resource for that?
Yeah. Jeez. Holy cow. www.elitefts.com. We've been putting out content for you guys for 20 years. So just on the YouTube channel, there's actually 2 YouTube channels. So the channel you're watching this on is the channel that we use. Then we have an archive channel, which is not that hard to find. And there's old stuff, on the archive channel. So I think we did, and we're gonna
Yeah, I was gonna say we're putting them up on the newer one too.
Yeah,
slowly. So.
And our goal is to eventually migrate all of them over, but there's a lot of videos, man, and there's a lot of them that are just one exercise, because we had an exercise index at a time. So there's a lot of things that we need to redo that we're going to redo. But a couple of the videos that we have on, I think it's on both channels, is so you think you can squat, and so you think you can bench, and so you think you can deadlift. I think the so you think you can squat is 5 segments, and so you think you can bench is 7 segments, video segments. Now, if you find the article on elitefts.com, all the videos are going to be in the article. So there's several places that you can search this. So, I mean, you can't fail if you just type if you Google elitefts.com bench press. You're going to find anything and everything that you need for your bench press using linear methods, block methods, or conjugate methods, technical, mental, or physical. We've covered everything. There's over 1 million pages of content, which I don't want that to make you feel like you can't find shit. Our site, I will admit, sucks to be able to search, which is why I highly suggest you Google elitefts.com, then whatever you want to search, you will find anything related to training. Well, almost anything. We will not talk about PEDs, but you're going to find anything except that. So, and mass amounts. And from that standpoint, all of our team members that are on Instagram they do AMAs, a lot of them on a weekly basis. All of them, to the best of my knowledge, answer every one of their DMs. I personally answer every one of my DMs. So there's that resource as well. I'm available anytime, and if for some reason I don't answer a DM, I actually feel bad, because there was one guy that asked something about the lower back, and he asked it in the right way that I didn't have to reply saying I'm not a doctor or a medical clinician, that I told him I would answer him, and I can't find his frickin' DM. So if you're watching this, send me the same thing that you sent me before. That way I know it's you, and then I'll answer your question. But I can't find the damn thing. I even flagged it. So if for some reason I don't answer your DM, it's not because I'm blowing you off. It's because of something like that. I spend easily 2 hours a day answering DMs. So I answer all of them, even the stupid trolls. I'll answer them, but I'm not going to answer the weed oil ads and all that bullshit that I get through whatever that new DM bullshit account is. I don't know. They got 3 different things now, so I don't know how to figure out the DMs. You got different categories, but anyhow, I answer all of them except stupid ads and the porn stars.
You don't answer those?
Well, they're fake porn stars. It's some dude in some dude in his mom's basement.
He could be a porn star.
This is fucking true. He's a porn connoisseur.
Yeah.
Hey,
all right, thanks for tuning in, guys.
Yep. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. When we break this down, you have an explosive day, which starts with the GAW work. And then after that movement, you have the raw work. Yeah. And then the puff, puff, puff work. It's part of the horse cocking method.
For sure. If you have no focus, you have to come to a conclusion at some point. Otherwise, it's a waste of gym time. Because if you're not going to one-up something, then it's 2 steps backwards.